WN. Ravens, they play Saturday night and a long flight to the West Coast. I remember when Billick would take the teams in there 2 days ahead of time. The Ravens will be making their trip on Friday for a Saturday night game. It'll be twilight-ish on Saturday night in Carson, California, when the Ravens take on the Chargers. Luke Jones joins us now to talk not only about the upcoming week, but to, again, take a look back at the mistakes and the things that went right and wrong against the Tampa Bay Bucs. I guess we could take this player by player and drive by drive and what the offense has done to the defense and what that's allowed for the defense and special teams gaffes. It was a complex game on Sunday with a lot of twists and turns, and as much as it felt like the Ravens were sort of kind of in control, they were always one play away from having a disaster fall on them Sunday.
Yeah, and that's what makes this style so weird because, you can go back to, the Cincinnati game was a one-score game. Never really felt like the Ravens were in control, even though they ran the ball so well, and that was something that you weren't necessarily anticipating. We didn't know what to expect in Lamar Jackson's first start. The Oakland game was very tight until the Ravens get a special team score and a defensive touchdown. You look at the Atlanta game. That one felt, this one felt similar to that in the sense that you never really felt after the first half, at any point in the second half, did you really feel like they were in great danger? But it was still a close game. And Atlanta, it was a one-score game until, I guess they kicked the field goal to go up by, 9, I guess it was.
Well, you're always a fingertip away from danger when you're in a one-score game, or even a two-score game, really, unless you get down to the nitty-gritty. And, for them, it was – every play was important. Execution was important. Concentration on keeping your eyes on the ball and holding on to the ball was important. Even Lamar Jackson, the 3 points before the end of the first half, that was a nanosecond away from being a classic – rookie, I don't know what I'm doing blunder, right? That it came as close as you would possibly want to come.
Yeah, it was, although I can remember Joe Flacco doing that in 2014.
Oh, Tom Brady did that a couple of years ago. Yeah,
so it happens. And that's one thing we need to remember. As much as I do think there is a higher expectation now, not for Lamar Jackson specifically, but really for this coaching staff, for this organization, because they're deliberately saying, we're going with a rookie over a guy that won us a Super Bowl. You can't just chalk it up to, he's just a rookie, because, you put him out there, so you have a lot of faith in him not to make those mistakes. But so certainly you look at some of those types of things, but just in general, they just have such a small margin for error. They've won 4 out of 5. Give them credit. There's no question about that. But each of these 5 games have been a one-score game in the fourth, at least early in the fourth quarter, and it's really nerve-wracking with that part of it. Now, you love the way that they're just able to choke out the opposing defense and the way that they've been able to dominate the time of possession in the second half of so many of these games. We already talked about it. The Ravens had a 21-13 to 8:47 time of possession advantage in the second half. That's terrific. It wasn't quite as great as it was against Atlanta, but it's pretty darn close. And so I guess that makes an 8-point lead feel much bigger. But at the same time, when Tampa Bay gets the ball back, they're one long pass to Mike Evans or one Eric Weddle slip or one Marlon Humphrey slip away from it potentially being a tie game. So it's really nerve-wracking from that standpoint, and it really illustrates how small your margin for error is. And to your point, Lamar Jackson barely gets that ball away at the end of the first half when if his knee's down, it's going to run out. So you have to be really fine in those ways, and that's where you do look at the fact that the Ravens turned the ball over a couple times. Now, they got one of their own with the Humphrey pick in the second half, but you got to be fine protecting the ball, and you have to think the Ravens, if they're going to go to the Chargers and pick up a win on Saturday night, they can't have turnovers because that's the kind of team that's going to make you pay severely for that. And even though it didn't turn out that way in Kansas City with the late strip sack, we know that very well could have would have turned out that way if the Chiefs had a competent kicker, who makes a very makeable kick there. So, it hasn't been perfect, but
we still have the best kicker in the league, right? I mean, I know we're arguing about Marlon Humphrey being the best player on the team, and that's starting to emerge and I think show itself. And we're going to be talking about that if it continues to show itself into the weeks ahead, the next couple of weeks at least. But having a kicker, especially on a rainy day, Tucker was on the cover of the program, that they gave me on Sunday here, and I got my Royal Farms coffee out, and I'm doing all that stuff, and I'm like, on a game like that, an ugly game, having a kicker means everything, and you figure that out when the Buccaneers are wearing their creamsicle jerseys on the first extra point, right?
Right. I mean, you see a slip there. I mean, look in the Pittsburgh game. I mean, look what Pittsburgh is dealing with Boswell right now. I mean, they literally were trying out other guys this past week until they decided to stick with him, and he was in the Pro Bowl last year now.
Every kick is an adventure with him, right?
Right. But you just see how fleeting it can be. I mean, we talked about this when Tucker missed the extra point against New Orleans. I don't think anyone was expecting him to go in the tank. That said, there have been plenty of really damn good kickers who miss a kick. They miss an extra point. And they're never the same. I mean, I think back to Mike Vanderjagt in Indianapolis. I mean, there was a time when he was maybe considered the best kicker in the league.
And then he became the drunk kicker.
Yeah, and then he misses a couple crucial kicks, and he's out of the league before you know it. I mean, it happens very quickly. And Billy Cundiff,
he's in a Canadian Penal League is where he is.
Billy Cundiff was a Pro Bowl kicker in, 2010? And he was gone from the Ravens, a little over a year later.
That's a fair point. I mean, there's a psychological part of that is hypnotizing one way or another, right? Like in the zone or not in the zone, and Steve Sachs and everything in between, right?
Right. And it's not as though Tucker did anything extraordinary on Sunday. I mean, the 2 field goals that he made were from 24 yards and 35 yards. I mean, not like he hit a 55-yarder in the pouring down rain, but we've seen him make those tremendous kicks, and his consistency, albeit now, it is kind of ironic now that we've mentioned that he did miss that extra point against New Orleans, and if the Ravens lose against the Chargers and fall short of the playoffs by one game, you're going to be wondering what might have been there. But at the same time, they also have won a ton of games because of Justin Tucker. He hasn't necessarily had those big clutch moments this year. He hasn't had the chance to make those game-winning kicks as he has in past years. But, I mean, the consistency that you see with him, and you just see the bad kicking around the league. I mean, not so much this week, but especially last week when I didn't make the trip to Kansas City, so I had a chance to watch plenty of other action from around the league, sitting on the couch. And I kid you not, I'm pretty sure I saw more missed field goals than made kicks last Sunday. And it just speaks to how this league is, and it really does speak to how valuable it is to have that great kicker. I mean, if you just have
especially in the rain, right? I mean, when you have a game like we had on Sunday, I mean, it's going to be 70 and 0% of precipitation on Saturday, so that will not be an issue out at the StubHub place out in Carson, California. But, in 8 of the games this week, the chances of the weather, if not the wind, if not the rain or the snow, that's where we are in the season. So, I mean, and that will determine some of these 8 and 6s and 6 and 8s, right?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, we've seen it in the playoffs. Another kicker I failed to mention. I mentioned Vanderjagt. Blair Walsh was a Pro Bowl kicker. He misses that kick against Seattle in the playoffs a few years back, and out of a job soon thereafter. He didn't make it through a full next season with the Vikings. So it's tough. I mean, as much as, and I've been as guilty of this as anyone. I've talked about it. I haven't been someone that has just gushed over Justin Tucker, mainly because I don't know what else there is to say other than he's the best. I mean, there isn't really any nuanced discussion about it. I mean, he's the best. And
right. If you have a kick and it's 60 yards, you want him before you want anybody.
That's not this guarantee that he's definitely going to make it every single time, but boy, he makes a ton from 50 and beyond. And there's no other kicker you'd rather have than Justin Tucker. And, I mean, the Ravens, no matter how far they end up going, whether they make it to the playoffs or whether they're playing in January. They have that advantage they always have, and that's what made that New Orleans game as shocking as it was. And you hope that that's not the difference, but it's not really the difference because they lost a lot of other games too, and they've had opportunities to win some other games, and they haven't made plays at various points. Going back to the Cleveland game, going back to the New Orleans game, the second Pittsburgh game. They didn't make plays. So it's never one moment. It's never one game. It's never one kick. It's never one play. But it's an all-encompassing thing, and that's one advantage that the Ravens have every single week. And it hasn't necessarily been a game-winning kick kind of scenario, but hey, the Ravens have a chance to win the game with 2 minutes to go against the Chargers, and they're down by 1 point. Have a chance at a field goal, you feel damn good about Justin Tucker making that. So as much as we talk about their margin for error not being really all that great, their special teams, albeit now with the hiccup with Cyrus Jones, you didn't want to see that, but their special teams, the kicking game, it's been there all along, but the rest of their special teams have really caught up over the second half of the year, other than the muff on Sunday that was pretty ugly. Let's face it, as John Harbaugh said, that's one that they're just going to try to forget about because that was such a bad play by Cyrus Jones, who had done such a terrific job to that point.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Charles Newsonoff & Sons since 1923. True love comes in all shapes and sizes. Sydney's out there for the holidays. Last minute, go see him at 695 right off of Paring Parkway. You can see him right at the outer loop at charlesnewsonoff.com. Also, our friends at Lee Tessier and the Lee Tessier team, Baltimore's premier realty team, and the folks I trust with my real estate transactions. Over 50 years doing it right. And I got some background with him through Dundalk and through the Leukemia Lymphoma Society and the Man of the Year. Lee Tessier, great folks there. Selling homes, including mine. Find yours at leetessier.com. Also, Bill Cole and our friends at Cole Roofing, sponsor of our community and charity series. Bill will Dr. Melfi me up for the holidays here and a trip out to San Diego where there's no longer a football team, and Carson, California, where the Chargers now sort of squat on their 11-3 record and standing squarely in the way of the Ravens playing postseason football here this week. So shout out to Bill Cole and our friends at Cole Roofing. Also, our friends at Costas, if you're feeling crabby and the holidays are here, just a reminder that they have crabs. So if you got family coming in, crabs, crab cakes, Pete, Nick, they work very hard this time of the year to make sure that they're keeping the Costas tradition alive. Great jazz music on Wednesday night if you want to check that out as well. Costas, it's always in season, man. That's what I'm saying. Costas in. Luke is here. He is always in season. You know what? I don't report card here much, right, bro? I mean, we don't sort of go one by one here. But, look, we've done a lot of Lamar, and we could talk about the Gus Bus and Kenneth Dixon and the energy he provides and what's happened to Crabtree. And quite frankly, you could say that about anything in this passing game. What's happened to guys disappearing when you don't throw the ball much, guys don't catch the ball much. But defensively here, for the step up that's going to need to be made out in San Diego, and I guess I want to start this with Weddle and work backward because of the pedigree he has there and Rivers and all of that. What do you like about the defense right now, Luke?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be pleased with how they're playing overall. What I really like is the depth that they have at the cornerback position. I mean, Marlon Humphrey, he was the star of the game for the Ravens on the defensive side of the ball. I think Sunday was a day that really shows, in my mind, and apologies to guys like C.J. Mosley and Eric Weddle and Terrell Suggs who have been to Pro Bowls here recently for the Ravens. I think Marlon Humphrey's their best defensive player. I mean, I really do. I like the depth that they have when you not just talk about him, but Jimmy Smith and Brandon Carr and Tavon Young. Anthony Averett played some nice snaps for them last week. I just think they have a lot of depth there. I think they're strong.
You wrote 5 years about how horrible it was, right?
Hey, well, they finally committed to it, and the next step is for them.
I don't think they didn't commit to it. They finally succeeded. I mean, I think Matt Elam And, they draft a kid who gets himself killed in a go-kart in the offseason. I mean, they've had knee blowouts in Tavon. They've had a lot of things go wrong. They've tried really, really hard through the draft and, through the Tony Jeffersons and the Eric Weddles. I mean, to your point, they've put a lot of resources into it because Ozzie and Eric are seeing the same thing every offseason you were seeing in 14, 15, 16, 17, right?
You're talking about safety. I'm talking about corner. I'm not enamored with the Ravens safety play. I'm really not.
Fair enough. For value, I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fine. I think, put it this way, Eric Weddle's not making a ton of plays out there. I think the cerebral presence that he brings as far as on the back end, and we know that he took over kind of the helmet, the helmet headset when Mosley got hurt early in the season, and I think that's worked for them. I think they got some decent contributions from Chuck Clark while Tony Jefferson was out, but neither one of those guys are guys that really move the meter. I'm talking about corner, and they didn't commit to corner, and that was their issue from the time that they drafted Jimmy Smith until they took Marlon Humphrey last year. From what just going off memory, and this was I can't believe I can't remember it for sure, but I'm pretty sure they hadn't taken a corner on day one or day two. It had been a bunch of Asa Jackson, those types of guys, and they tried to do it with Band-Aids like Sharice Wright and Kyle Arrington. You go down that list, and I mean Ladarius Webb for a number of years wasn't the same guy that he had been, but they have committed to it, and they did it last year by bringing in a guy like Brandon Carr, who has been very solid for them. He's not great, but he is as solid of a number two kind of corner that you'll find, and he's dependable. And
also a huge clubhouse. I mean, the anti-Chris McAllister kind of pickup.
But just talking about his play on the field, when used properly and not put on an island against Antonio Brown, as he was in last December, and you saw how that turned out, when used properly, he's been very solid for them. And Jimmy Smith, after a slow start coming back from the suspension and the Achilles injury last year, has played better in recent weeks. So they have a lot of depth there. I mean, that's my favorite part about this defense right now, and I think that's a part of this defense that's set up pretty nicely for the future, regardless of what happens with Jimmy Smith and with Brandon Carr, and knowing that probably at least one of those guys won't be back next year, just based on kind of where they are from a roster standpoint and cap and needing to allocate resources elsewhere. But I like that. You have to like their interior. Say what you want about Brandon Williams, and look, I had my reservations about that deal from the start, and the fact that Michael Pierce has outplayed Brandon Williams this season, quite frankly. It kind of validates some of the concerns there, but Brandon Williams made a huge stop on that 3rd and 1 to set up what ended up being a failed 4th down conversion.
Well, no one's really run all that effectively against it. I mean, this hasn't been a leaky middle. I would say the linebackers and the safeties would be considered maybe the leakier part of the team at this point.
Sure.
Right, sure.
Yeah. I mean, and that was probably the most surprising part of the game from a defensive standpoint for me. Was I wasn't shocked to see Jameis Winston move around, and he didn't make a ton of plays, but he made a couple plays with his arm. Certainly the big gain to Evans on the 3rd and long situation, but I was really surprised with how much success Tampa Bay had running the ball in the first half. I mean, at halftime, they had 15 carries for 68 yards, and their yards per carry was even better than that in the first quarter. I did not anticipate that. Peyton Barber's a fine running back, but I did not expect him to do much at all. To their credit, the Ravens really cleaned up the run defense at intermission for the second half. But I was surprised by that. But it's funny. You asked me what my favorite part about this defense is. Cornerback depth is great. Beyond that, I'm not sure that there's anything else individually that I really love about it. I just think it's all
sometimes there's a run stop, sometimes there's a pass rush, sometimes the linebackers get into coverage and and can hold their own. But I think the big issue is third down and getting off the field, and even fourth down, as we learned against Mahomes, last week, that getting off the field is everything. First and second down are nice, and whether it's 3rd and 1 or whether it's 3rd and 13, you got to get off the field, at some point.
Yeah, right. But what's funny about that now, some of these 3rd and long type situations recently, speaking more so the last 2 weeks, and we're always thinking about what happened the last couple of weeks because that's recency bias.
It's been a little more leaky the last 2 weeks.
But overall, they've been superb on third down. I mean, their third down defense, look it up. I mean, they've been right at the top of the league.
Well, go back to see what Matt Ryan did against them and then what he did against Arizona, right?
Sure. I mean, so what's crazy about it is you look at this defense, where they are statistically. I think they're the second best defense in the NFL. I'll give the Bears the nod because they're pretty close in a lot of the categories where the Ravens have a slight edge, but the Bears have a ton of takeaways. They've sacked the quarterback consistently. They have an elite of the elite kind of player in Khalil Mack coming over from the Raiders. But I'm okay. I'm totally okay with saying the Ravens have the second best defense in the NFL. But what's funny about it is, who would you say individually do you identify and say that's a Pro Bowl player? Maybe Marlon Humphrey, and Marlon Humphrey's not the best corner in the NFL just yet. He still has some growth. He's getting to be on that short list, and I certainly
that changes the game. Having a shutdown corner at this point,
no doubt, but,
game changer.
But my point is, you have this defense that has excelled so much statistically, and they've played so well since the bye week. And I know they gave up 27 against Kansas City, and they were leaky late. And that kind of ruined what had been an A performance, kind of dropped it down to a B or a B minus. But individually, you look at all the parts, and there are very few guys that you say individually is having a great year. There are a bunch of guys having solid to good years. I mean, it really is a defense that is a sum being greater than the parts. I really believe that. I mean, Eric Weddle's not having a Pro Bowl season. C.J. Mosley, this might be C.J. Mosley's worst NFL season to this point. I mean, that's not to say C.J.'s been bad, but he clearly has dealt with injuries and has had his issues in pass coverage more so than even in some other years where that was a knock on him. And Terrell Suggs isn't having a Pro Bowl season. I don't think he's been as impactful as he was last year, certainly. And, go down the list. I mean, there's very few guys that you point to and say, man, that guy's having a great year. But on the flip side, there are very few guys that you point to and say, that guy's not having a good year. I mean, you would say, a couple guys you would say, a little underwhelming. You can point to a Brandon Williams and say, okay, is he living up to what his cap figure is? Is Eric Weddle living up to what his cap figure is? And that's certainly debatable. But there are very few guys on this defense that you just point to and say they're an utter liability. They have there are moments where they struggle, sure, but even a guy like Patrick Owasso, who everyone thought it was a foregone conclusion that Kenny Young would be the starter and Owasso would be back to being a backup and a special teams guy. Owasu's played pretty darn well over the course of the season. Not a Pro Bowler or anything crazy like that, but he's improved.
Well enough to keep himself out on the field.
Yeah. So you just look at this defense, and that's what makes it really interesting compared to some of the great defenses of the past. And I'm not comparing this team to even 2011, let's say. Not comparing it to 2008. Certainly not comparing it to 2006 or 2003. And, I mean, the cream of the crop, the historic 2000 team. I don't want to compare this defense to some of those groups. But in the context of where the league is right now, with offense being king and the passing game being king, defense has done a pretty darn good job overall. And what's amazing about that is you don't look at this defense as having a lot of stars. They have guys that used to be stars, but they're not really stars anymore. And the only one you really point to and say, that guy looks like he's going to be a Pro Bowler over the next couple years is Marlon Humphrey, really, right? I mean, it's hard to point to anyone else on this defense and say, that guy looks like a Pro Bowl player next year. That guy looks like a Pro Bowl player in 2020. And that's not to guarantee that Humphrey will be that, but he's the one guy you point to as being this dramatically ascending type player, whereas other guys are kind of just holding on or just being really solid. And I think that's what really speaks to a guy that we haven't mentioned yet, Wink Martindale, I think, has just done a terrific job with this defense, considering they don't have a Khalil Mack kind of star, that they still have been able to get the job done to the degree that they have this year.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills as well as at the warehouse for the proclamation that Brandon Hyde will become the new manager of the Orioles. You can hear our Oriole manager conversation out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships directly and digitally to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life and only $5 down. You don't need a New Year's resolution. You need PlanetOfTriumphs.com to get some inspiration. Last but never least, any breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis is here 3 until 5 on Thursday, driving you home and getting you ready for the holiday and a big, big Saturday night kickoff out in Carson, California, as the San Diego Superchargers are now the LA Superchargers. They're pretty super at 11-3, and we'll be talking about that all week long with lots of Chargers folks as well as Luke. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.